Hello folks, and welcome back to the MRS commission build. We're continuing our 1970 Pontiac Firebird. Set that up there in front. I usually use my box. Keep it up in front of me so I can use that as a reference. So I'm just going to be unpacking a little bit from getting back from the store. I decided to try to film this at home a little bit more because all my tools are here and I can produce more content for you guys. So that's what we're going to be working on. Alright, so we left off, we were doing some body work, doing a little bit of sanding, getting ready to do some panel line scribing, but anyway, that's where we left off. So that's what I'll be working on now. Alright, so now that I've got these parts back at home, I need to go wash them. So I am going to go do that now and be back in a moment. Alright, back from the sink. Got all the parts clean. Picked up. Now, I don't want to let water sit on here, especially where I am with a lot of mineral heavy hard water. We don't want water spots getting in or contaminating our stuff. I was talking about, you want to be careful when you're washing off your parts because like these came off the tree as I'm washing them in the sink, so you don't want that going down the drain. So stop up your sink, make sure you don't have any parts left in the sink before you open up the drain. Let me show you this neat little, I was using compressed air cans, duster cans, to try to get the remaining water off of my parts. Got tired of that, and so I found this neat little computer duster. It's a little rechargeable guy on Amazon, so I've been using this now and it actually works pretty good. Alright, so I've got, like I said, last time we left off, we started marking some stuff up. So I can feel here, that's pretty smooth. Obviously the black is gone. That's a really sharp edge. So that still is there. So back to our handy dandy tools and off we go. Alright, looks like we've got most of the mold lines off, or all the mold lines off. You can see a little bit here that there's still quite a bit of black there that looks like it hasn't even been touched. That's going to give you an indication of a low spot. So this quarter panel is a little bit higher than the trunk lid. So you can kind of, if you want, you can kind of keep sanding that down. Get that to level out. You can use some putty. If you do that, of course you don't want to, you're going to end up filling your line, but that's okay. You just put your putty on, smooth it on as you want, and then get your panel line scriber and just scribe your line as it's still wet, and that way you'll still maintain your panel line that you want. And like I said, we're just basically giving the body a good sand. You can see how that's new plastic. It's still got that shine on there. It's nice and smooth and slippery. We want to take that shine off so it's nice and dull, and that way it'll give give us a better surface for our paint to adhere to, our primers, things like that. One thing you do want to be careful as you're sanding your body, getting ready for things, you want to be careful of your small details. Marker lights, locks, door locks, things like that. You want to be careful. Just kind of slow down a little bit more, sand around them a little more carefully, so you're not sanding off the details that are supposed to be there. All right, so that looks pretty good. If you wanted to, at this stage, you could throw some primer on it and start painting. But for me, I want to take those door panel lines are actually pretty deep. I'm gonna take those a little bit deeper. Some of these fender flares, I'm gonna scribe those just a little bit. One of the things that I struggle with when I start scribing is I start scribing some of these too deep. Obviously the doors you do want deep, but some of these other little details you don't really want as deep, just enough to kind of differentiate it that it's an extra part that's been added on to the car. Because right now there's a little seam, which is nice, that's molded into there, but it's obviously molded into the plastic, and we want to just separate that just a little bit, just to give it a little bit more of a realistic appearance. And then I am going to kind of scribe around my windshield frame and my rear window frame a little bit, because we are going to bare metal foil these, so I want to give a little bit more of a groove for that bare metal foil so when I scribe it with my knife, it gives me a nice clean cut. I like these door handles too. Obviously they're molded into the plastic as well, but I'm gonna see if we can't scribe around those, make them stand out a little bit more as well, and then we'll be ready for some primer. Well, I've got my panel line scriber out. I've already got my chisel blade in there from when I was working on it last time. So we're just going to go ahead and attack some of these injector pin marks. See if we can't just clean some of those up a little bit. So some of these are a little bit deep, so either we can try to sand them down, or we might fill them in a little bit. Alright, so the good thing about some of these mold injection pin marks is they're pretty small and they come off pretty easily, so that's nice. But some of them are a little deep, like you can see that one, there's plenty of black inside. That one's got a little ring around it. And then on the headliner, there's a couple there. So we're gonna fill these in a little bit. All right, and to fill that in, we're just gonna use our Mr. Surface 500 from Mr. Hobby. So we'll put those in the dryer, let those dry up for a while, and then we'll keep going. So we're back and got everything out of the dryer. So we just need to clean up a couple spots, and then we'll start some scribing. Okay, I think that's it for sanding. Let's move on to scribing. So again, we're going to use my Tamiya fine engraving tool and take out the 2mm chisel blade. For most of the scribing, I find this one, the medium one, which I think is a 0.2, just works. I just like it the best so far for just all-around purpose scribing. If I want some deeper stuff, for example, maybe I'll use this one for where on parts on the real one-to-one car where they open all the way. It's not just a seam line, it's an actual opening part, like a door or a trunk lid. Maybe I'll use the larger one to give me a larger scribe. So let's start off with my medium blade, and eventually I'll do some smaller scribing and some larger scribing. All right, and then one more thing I want to do is the engine bay is, of course, molded right into the fender. I want to separate that just a little bit, give that a little bit more of a realistic separation look. So I'll just use my engraving tool for that. That's it for my larger lines. Let's move to our smaller blade. So again, the panel line scribing isn't something you have to do. I just like to do it because it kind of, for me, it just kind of cleans things up a little bit more. It will take a lot more time. If you, like I said, if you mess up and scribe down your body panel or something, that again is going to take more time. You want to keep it smooth because if you use a panel line accent color at the end, which I will do, you want to kind of make sure that your lines are smooth and not jagged as the blade skips across if you're putting too much pressure or something like that. Just kind of making sure that everything you're working on, you're getting your edges cleaned up and your joints are meeting. Your joints are meeting really well. Just basic craftsmanship. One word of caution, this blade is really thin. I have broken this blade and this is my second one. There's a lot of seconds for me. So this is a fragile blade, it will break, so be very careful with it. You can build your models any way you want. In fact, I think my first model when I was younger, I don't even think I even painted it. I just went through the process of putting it together, and it's just not a bad thing. I mean, even that's you're learning about the models, how they go together, what to look for. You're gaining experience even just doing that. So again, don't think that just because you're seeing me do something that's the way it has to be done. That is the farthest thing from the truth. Like I said, a lot of these techniques I've learned from other people. Most of them from Tom on the Scale Modeling channel. Love that guy's stuff. I've learned a ton from him. Alright, so on this one there's actually two lines that go around, and I'm going to take out one of those lines. To do that, we are going to fill it in with our trusty Mr. Surface. There's a couple of other little things we're going to need to fix as well, but I'd like to wait till I'm done with all my scribing because I always make little mistakes that need correcting, so I usually just wait till I'm done. Also, I wanted to wait and scribe the inside line first, because if I accidentally get some filler inside of my line, I can just go back over it with my scribing tool and re-engage my line. All right, we'll let that dry and then we'll come back and finish that up. All right, out of the dryer. So let's clean that line up, and it looks like I'm probably, just at first glance, I'm gonna need to put another coat of filler on it. which is typical. But we'll get it cleaned up and take a look. So it looks like it got most of it filled in. There's a couple little spots right here that we'll need to add some touch up to. All right, back in the dryer. All right, so while that's drying up, let's start working on some of our other body parts here and getting them cleaned up and ready for primer as well. Some of the other tools that I use, I was using these. There's a couple different things you can use. A lot of guys will just use, just your hobby knife, and you can cut some of these off the sprues if you want to do that. I started using these sprue nippers from Micromark. These work really well. And then I picked up these sprue cutters from Tamiya, and I use these most of the time now. Sometimes when you cut these, it'll actually cut a little notch into your plastics. So sometimes I'll come out a little bit and nip that off, and that way I can just clean that up with my knife if I want. If I'm not too concerned about it, I'll just flush cut it right up against the part and cut it that way. But I am going to give myself a little bit of working room since this is kind of a high visibility part. I'm going to give myself a little bit of some working room there. These I'm just going to go ahead and flush cut. These ones come off pretty easily. And on some of these parts, the sprue connection point is a little bit wide. If you try to cut them like this, it will cut into it a lot more. So another tool you can use is you can get a little razor saw for your number 11 X-Acto blade handle, and you can cut them out with that. Now when I was younger, I used to just wiggle these parts back and forth and just snap off the tree eventually, but what you can do if you want, again on some other parts that maybe you're not too concerned, but where these are actually going to be body parts, you run the risk of having it snap off and take some of the plastic out of your molded in part that you want to keep. For these ones with the wide, I'll use my little saw. Now with this, I have to be careful because sometimes I'll start to angle in and I'll cut into the body part as well. So again, you just try to give yourself a little bit of leeway. Obviously that's pretty rough, but at least I know that I'm not cutting into my hood panel, so I can just use my knife and my sanding sticks and smooth that down where I want it to be. So that's exactly what I want. Just kind of double check my sprue, make sure I don't have any parts on there. I have thrown away sprue with parts on them that were really small. I didn't notice. So one thing you might want to do if you're using a garbage or a collection bin or anything, just hang on to those sprue parts until you're done with your build, just in case you missed something. At least you can go back, double check your sprues and make sure you didn't accidentally throw something away. So that's another thing, I actually just thought of that. You can score with your knife along there, and then that'll give you a little bit more assurance that you're not going to snap your part and take off molded plastic that you want to keep on there. All right, so we'll go and get these parts cleaned up. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through every single part, but it's the same process. Again, if you want to leave parts on the sprue and paint them, that's up to you. I usually end up taking almost every part off of the sprue. That way I can clean them up, make sure there's no more mold lines, sprue attach points, make sure I can get all those parts cleaned up and then get them ready for paint. So one more thing I'm going to try is we are going to attach some of these body panels to the car, to the main body, before we paint it. The reason is because if you can use this Tamiya cement, which is technically not a glue, it's actually a weld. Because what this does is it melts the plastic, and that way when you join your pieces together, it actually creates a very, very solid bond. So if I go through my instructions and if anything says that parts are going to be the same color, for example, seats, engine, transmission, things like that, I will go through and use my cement to get those glued together or cemented together. It just creates a really good bond. After my parts are painted, I usually end up using a lot of super glue. Again, I got these from MRS Hobby Shop. The thing, I really like the super glues, but they tend to adhere to the paint more than the plastic parts. So you can scrape the plastic parts where you're going to join them together, your gluing points. Sometimes I just glue them right together. If it's a small piece that's not going to be bumped around a lot, I'll just glue them right to each other. But otherwise, if you want to get a better bond, you're going to want to scrape off your glue points to get a better bond on some of those. So again, I'll show a couple of these, but I'm not gonna show every single part because it's going to be pretty much the same process. If you haven't used this Tamiya cement, it works by capillary action, so you kind of touch it to the seam, and I've kind of got it clamped a little bit tight. So I'll go ahead and run it all over all of them, but if you touch it to a gap, it will actually pull into the seam. And you can also do it from glue them from the inside or cement it from the inside. That way you're not, if you're trying to hide your glue seams and stuff, you could do that. All right, so we got that out of the dryer. We got those edges cleaned up. That looks a lot better. Rescribe that just to get some of the dust out of there. Check some things over. Got my edges cleaned up. So the instructions call to mount the chassis first, then add in these extra parts. But since they don't curve under the body a whole bunch, I want to try and put these parts in first so that I get a good strong cement bond on there. So like that for the rear tail pan, and then the front bumper. Just need to make sure that your fender skirts are on the outside of that. And then test fit those. I cleaned up the edges just to give it a good smooth seat, and that looks pretty good. I'm going to glue these on, and then the rear spoiler, I'll glue that on as well. I'll cement that on the back, and then we will be ready to prime this. So let's do that. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Put that up in the dryer. Pardon my reach. And let that dry.